VocalEye Almost Live Zoom, Mount Pleasant Mural Tour, hosted by Amy Amantea, with special guests Ali Butcher and Eileen Barrett.
Welcome to this VocalEye Almost Live event. I'm Amy Amantea. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Associate Director here at VocalEye. I am your host for these Almost Live events, and I am a member of the blind community and very, very proud to be a member of this loving, fantastic community. Big thank you to all of those who support VocalEye and have supported and continue to support this organization and our Almost Live programming, supporting through donations, supporting through testimonials that have come in. This is all a great way to support this organization, and it's all greatly appreciated. We read all the testimonials, we use them in our grant writing and send them to our funders, and we just love knowing how our programming impacts folks in the space. And if you happen to be watching this particular episode on our YouTube channel, you can also support VocalEye. You can hit those like and subscribe buttons. You can check out our website. You can subscribe to our newsletter. And you can also write us testimonials and make donations as well. So www.vocaleye.ca is a place where you can find out more about our organization and connect with us. VocalEye is broadcasting to you all from the traditional and unceded or stolen lands of the Coast Salish peoples, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Today is March the 27th, and that marks World Theatre Day. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about Indigenous theatre in Canada. It wasn't until the mid-1970s that Indigenous theatre was able to make a serious headway in development. So this came from an article that I had read about Indigenous theatre. And in the mid-1970s, this is a time when development of Indigenous theatre was really interested in their own writers and actors coming together with authentic theatre making. The Association of Native Development in the Performing Arts and the Performing and Visual Arts, so the acronym was ANDPVA, established the Native Theatre School, now the Center for Indigenous Theatre. This was established in 1974. This intensive program was something that explored authenticity in Indigenous culture and theater making. And the experience of Indigenous peoples and their history and culture in Canadian theater was really something that became of interest to Canada, and it sounds kind of icky to say that, in the late 1960s, with works such as The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, that was in 1967, Herschel Hardin's Esker Mike and His Wife, that was 1969, and by Len Peterson's A Show Called Almighty Voice in 1970. And with figures like Thompson Highway at the forefront, by the 1990s, Indigenous theatre had become a critical part of mainstream Canadian theatre. So this intensive program that was developed for theater makers, Indigenous theater makers, was about a movement for Indigenous folks who were taught under professional theaters to learn voice, movement, and text, and provided a forum for the exploration of Indigenous culture and performance in traditional ways. And virtually, they say, virtually that every Indigenous theater artist in Canada has passed through this theater school. And in 1980, the first Indigenous theatre celebration was held in Toronto, bringing together Indigenous artists from all over the world. And in 1982, Native Earth Performing Arts was established in Toronto under the artistic direction of Highway Thompson. And this company quickly developed an impressive production of shows. And one of their most successful shows was called Res Sisters, and it won several awards, both Dora and Chalmers Awards, for best new play, and it was about its accounts of a group of passionate bingo players who travel down to Toronto in the hopes of making it big, that big win. And so with this big show, the Rez sisters, it really spurred this legacy with this theater company of a history of really big shows in Indigenous theater. So there's this whole list of shows. And what I wanted to highlight from this was a couple of names that folks may know of Indigenous performers in Canadian theater. So Graham Greene is a name that people might know. He's started in theater, but is a big TV film actor. Dances with Wolves, who was in that. He's been in many, many things. Dory Linklater, and our very own in Vancouver, Margot Kane, who had an evocative play called Moon Lodge, which some of us may remember experiencing. So with that, some really interesting history about Indigenous theater on this National Theater Day. And I think that it's important to recognize that authentic storytelling and representation is important. And in this space, in this almost live space, we have had the privilege to witness and to experience a lot of authentic representation and culturally diverse and important art over the years that we've spent together in this space. And I know that I've had the opportunity to learn a lot, and that in this world there are experiences that are full and rich and that are very different from my own lived experience. And all of these experiences have a tremendous amount of value. And I think being exposed to them through art, I can say for myself, and I hope that you all feel the same, that the value of these experiences they're all equal to each other. There isn't one that is more valuable than the other. And I really appreciate learning about the different experiences that different people have, whether it's a political view or a cultural view, or a view of a systemic history that has been experienced through a group of equity-seeking people. So I really appreciate being able to be in this space with you all to witness these different types of art forms throughout the time we've spent together. So happy National Theatre Day to you all on this March the 27th, 2024, yet another Wednesday in the VocalEye Almost Live space. Tonight's Almost Live event is number 149, almost at 150, but we're not there yet, 149. And we gratefully acknowledge that the support of Metro Vancouver's Regional Cultural Project Grants program for making our descriptive tours possible this season, both online and in person. So a big thank you to the Metro Vancouver Regional Cultural Project Grants program. So without further ado, tonight's programming is about the Mount Pleasant Mural Tour, which we did in person this last summer. And Eileen Barrett and Ali Butcher are joining us in the space. So Eileen, Ali,
Hi, Amy.
where are you, my friends?
Hi, Amy.
Hello. I got squares. I love squares. So how are we this evening, my friends? Nice to see you both.
Delightful.
I love it, Ali. Delightful.
Ali is delightful.
Ali is delightful. I love it.
Now I'm blushing.
Ali hasn't nearly been in this space as many times as Eileen has. So maybe, Ali, you can introduce yourself to the folks in our audience and remind us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Sure. My name is Ali Butcher. I run an organization called Vancouver DeTours. And the whole idea behind Detours was we wanted to detouristify the tour. So we got sick of seeing the same sort of prescriptive, whitewashed touristic narratives, in itineraries, and thought, no, why isn't anyone telling other stories about this place? And so I started it back in 2008, quite a few years ago now. And in 2018, I think, I joined with the Mural Festival to start running their tour programming, because I just saw a really good alignment with what we were doing. This was another way of telling new stories about the spaces of the city through artwork, and oftentimes sort of hidden histories and things that weren't always represented in the landscape of the city. So when they approached me a few years back about teaming up with VocalEye, and figuring out how to do relay these art tours in a way that wouldn't revolve on people seeing them. It was just seemed like such an amazing opportunity. And I have to say, as someone who has done hundreds of mural tours and has seen these pieces now, probably close to 1,000 times, I definitely experienced them in a completely new way after that first partnership that we did with you.
Oh, you have to tell me more about that. How did you see them in a different way?
Just having to sort of search out how I could represent them without defaulting to the visual medium, right? Like how can
Yeah.
what were other ways that we could evoke what the artists were trying to say, and the experience of the the person who was viewing or consuming the art. How does it change when you're not looking at it? So that all these really made me rethink something that I had done at that point, hundreds of times. So it was an incredible experience.
What kind of impact, Ali, did that have on like other tours that you give outside of the VocalEye experience?
It definitely taught me to just try to find some other angles, right? That
Yeah.
it was fun in the like conventional. If you go through the sort of conventional tour guide school, which I did not, but I do know a lot of people who did. The like rule number one for them was like, if you can't see it, don't talk about it. I was always told by people who would run these, like pop up,
Interesting. Yeah.
because if I wanted to go and do a story that was sort of related to a site that we were looking at, they'd be like, nah, if it's not there, don't talk about it. If they can't see it. And I thought that seems like very limiting. And of course, this just showed it was far more limiting than I had originally thought.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's definitely made me rethink how to represent stories.
Thank you for that. This is, again, I feel like a broken record when I repeat things, but good access is good for everybody. Like, this is like, there's so many ways of being able to reinforce that concept over and over and over again. Eileen,
Yeah,
you're in this
hi.
space quite often, but there may be folks that, are new to you, or, folks watching on our YouTube channel that are like watching for the first time. Why don't you tell us a bit about you and your background?
Okay, I'm Eileen Barrett. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an actor, theater trained, but as we do in Vancouver, we do it all. So if you've seen me on really dumb commercials or Hallmark movies, yes, that would be me. And I was given the opportunity to start working with VocalEye about 10 years ago
Wow.
by Steph Kirkland, who asked me to come and learn how to do live audio description. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful to Steph because it has been, as Ali says, it's mind blowing when you are, especially an art form like theater that I, feel like that's my second home and know inside out and backwards when you start once again trying to reframe it and looking at it from the point of view of somebody who has different access. I find that I look at everything differently now because and just thinking about um not what is obviously there in front of you, but what to try and how do you serve the story and how do you serve the piece of art or the piece of theater that's being done before you. So yeah, so I love the opportunity to work with VocalEye. So yeah, that's me.
I love this. I love this. Um, we gathered as a group in person in the Mount Pleasant area, um, outside of the busyness of the Vancouver Mural Festival that happens every year. And because it's such a busy time of year, we kind of curated our own mini mini tour, mini walking tour in the Mount Pleasant area, and we had a good showing of people from our community that came out in person, and it was I remember it being a nice, beautiful, sunny day. And then after our lovely tour, we went out and we had lunch together and we had a lovely day. Um, what do you remember? Because what we're gonna do today is we're gonna share those murals in the order that we did the walking tour on from
Mhm.
that day. But I just want to ask you both about what you remember from the top of that day. Um,
I remember feeling grateful that
yeah.
the smoke from the wildfires actually cleared enough for us to be able to gather and to actually, do this tour, because, and it, once again, it felt very much like, you know, bringing that the environment very, very close. So yeah, I just felt really grateful that we were actually able to meet and to do what we were wanting to do.
Yeah. Ali,
Yeah.
anything that you remember from the top of the day?
Yeah, I did. That does actually, that brings the memories kind of flooding back now. I remember when I started, the environmental concerns were like, I hope it doesn't rain on that tour. Um, I do remember that too. I was worried because we were in one of those weeks where a lot of smoke was blowing in and you basically you wouldn't know, whatever the wind did that
Mm-hmm.
overnight, you would wake up and it would be, is it a day where we're going to have, hazardous air quality, or where it's going to be okay? And it ended up being okay. But I just thought how things have shifted as far as how we think about the weather and how it's going to impact a tour these days versus when I started 15, 16 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember gathering at the Mount Pleasant Community Center, where we all met up as a group, and sort of this kind of buzz of excitement, because some people had never been on a walking tour, and didn't really know what to expect. And, we were matching up with sighted guides, and there was kind of this little buzz of excitement. And, so I kind of remember this little buzz of energy that kind of went through people as we were embarking on this adventure, which to me always feels a little exciting. It's like a field trip. It's like, kindergarten kids going on a field trip. And I felt that in my soul. I was like, I know something great's going to happen today, but what it is, I'm not really sure, and all that kind of excitement. So I was game. I was ready. So with that, any other way we want to set up what we're doing, or do we want to just dive in?
Why don't we just dive in?
Yeah, we may not need any more setup, but we're going to talk through these as we go anyways. And then we're going to give folks an opportunity to come in and ask questions and such and share comments. So that'll happen too after we share these described murals. So let's maybe take a look at our first image. So Rick's going to bring up the first image, which is called Travelers in a Space Canoe. So Rick's going to bring up the image for us when he's ready.
And this is a mural that is right across from where we actually were gathered. So I think literally all of us turned around to face this image that was right across the street from where we were all gathered at Mount Pleasant Community Center. So it was really art just where we started out. So this image is called Travelers in a Space Canoe. The artist is Bracken Hanuse Corlett, and he painted it on this restaurant in 2017 as part of the Mural Festival then. The artist statement is: the skipper, the trickster, the hunter, and the dancer are traveling in a canoe transcending time and space. Stardust, sea monsters, electricity, and water are interwoven with ancestral iconography and color. Traveling as one into the unknown, each element interconnects into the whole. The canoe brought many teachings into my life, that's the artist saying this, as a youth, that I take into the present day. When we work together as one, we travel with more ease in our hearts, bodies, and minds. So this building is painted black, so the artwork really pops out in contrast. The background shapes and motifs, but not the characters, continue around the other side of the building, so that if you were looking at it from the front, it looks like a three-dimensional canoe. We're viewing the artwork from what would be the right side or the starboard side of the canoe. The prow of the canoe is the sharp right corner of the building, which rounds away out of sight of where we are now to the wall that we face. On the far right side of what we can see, on the curved front, one story up, is the image of a sky blue circular face with its mouth forming an O. That's on the front, on the prow. The face is as wide as the span of a short person's arms. So I'm about 5'2", so about 5 feet wide. Just below the face, to its left and right sides, are jagged sky blue lightning bolts. Underneath the lightning bolts are scrolls and ovoids of white, with a star shape at the center on the canoe's prow. Around the corner on the lower right side of the mural facing us, which would be the side of the canoe itself, is a profile view of a head in red, sky blue, black, and white. An arrow-shaped blue tongue sticks out from between the teeth, perhaps a sea monster. Stretching behind this face are ovoids containing images of salmon, orca, and raven, interspersed with blue waves. On the back end of the canoe, there is a sky blue face with a big white circular eye, with two more faces radiating out from behind it, which give the feeling of something transforming. The stern of the canoe points gracefully behind the faces, with a white star under its end. Sitting on the canoe, on the left, is a squatting figure wearing a tall white woven cedar hat. One of its arms is behind its back, while the other one is held forward and towards a blue rain cloud, with its drops falling into the canoe. In the rain cloud is a red ovoid. To the right of the cloud is a sky blue eye shape, and then to the right of that eye is a figure wearing an eagle headdress. This figure is powerfully muscled, and its arms appear to be swinging in a dance, as do its bent, crouched legs. The whole piece conveys a sense of movement and energy. And that's it for my notes.
Thanks so much, Eileen. Amazing. So as Eileen mentioned, this is by an artist called Bracken, Hanuse, Corlett, and he's an Indigenous artist from what today we call Vancouver Island. He specifically represents the Klahoose and the Canoe peoples over across the Salish Sea. And his work often features themes of cultural reclamation, survival, identity politics, hybridity, and decolonization. And he likes to, when I say hybridity, he likes to merge a lot of sort of more traditional styles from his culture, but he also has been really inspired by things like agit pop and manga, the dadas, and culture jamming. Things like Adbusters, and if you're sort of familiar with Banksy, I guess would be the most famous example of that, and bringing them together. And so that's sort of what he was doing in this space here as well. So as Eileen mentioned, there's a real sense of movement in the piece. It's not just physical movement through space. There's also an element of moving through time. And so he talked about how he wanted it to encompass the past, the present, and the future. And unlike Western concepts of time that they're often based on just sort of very like linear chronology in a straight line, this worldview often looks, there's a sense that you could have different eras and different moments that could be folded into each other simultaneously, alongside each other. Not everything's just traveling in one straight line. And he just chose the canoe because he also wanted to represent that he's not from this place. Although he is Coast Salish, he is not from the local host nations, from this territory. And so the canoe represents that idea that he's just passing through, that he's also a visitor, and to get us all to think about our relationship to this place and how we are visitors. And so for me as a guide as well, when I'm thinking about how to interpret this art, I also think about the placement of it, the landscape that was there before the city, and the relevance of the canoe, and how he made the canoe the central piece in this. And so if you know the history of this area of the city that we now call Mount Pleasant, before colonization, it was a large creek in a ravine. It later got the name Brewery Creek, if you know sort of Vancouver history, right? Because they tapped into it as a fresh water supply for the first breweries, for the mill workers. But that ravine, that creek, was often used for fishing, for hunting, for transportation, for the local host nations. And so it also, to me, it kind of evokes that city before the city as well. And this seems like a good place to point out too that both within our program tonight, you're going to see that the majority of the murals that we're going to discuss are from Indigenous artists, and that's very intentional. There was always a sort of purpose to give Indigenous artists a platform at the festival, and to ensure that there was always involvement from the top down. So not just featuring a few artists, but having curators, having community partners, So there's always an Indigenous curator as one of the 4 curators of the festival every year. Um, and there's going to be a particular emphasis on the local styles, and disrupt that idea that there's just one pan-Indigenous style on the West Coast, right? Um, really celebrate the local styles that come from this place as well. So there's sort of a cultural reclamation of the visual spaces of the city going on. Um, and I think it's really important for Indigenous residents to see that cultural reclamation reflected back to them in the landscape. So this is a great way for us to kick off with that theme in mind.
So we've switched images. And Eileen, this is the front of the building.
That's right. So this would be what would be considered the prow of the canoe. And we can see the big, this would actually be the front of the boat that if it were sailing, it would be, it would be moving down what is now a really busy thoroughfare, actually called Main Street in Vancouver. It's at the confluence between Main Street and Kingsway, 2 very busy streets, heading north towards where Ali, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that's actually a place where the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh would actually all meet to trade at the bottom where the water is at the inlet. So this piece is actually the prow section of it is, yeah, it's really, this is where the big moon face is at the top of it, and then the white kind of star shape underneath it. So yeah, so we've shifted around now to the prow part.
But I think what's interesting is the way that this building is shaped is, it kind of feels like a triangle with a rounded nose at the front. So if you imagine that the one end that you described as the side of the boat, then the front of the building is the front nose round of the boat, and then the other side, which we don't see, but we assume that it's the same on each side of the canoe, that the mural mimics itself on the same side.
It actually doesn't on the Main Street side. It's very not just, but more generalized shapes and ovoids and lines rather than the actual figures and things. And I think, I'm not sure, Ali, maybe you could speak to that, as to maybe the artist wanted to really confine the figures to the one side, or I'm not really quite sure, but it definitely, yeah, it's different on the what would be the port side. It's yeah, it's quite a bit more or quite a bit less figurative.
Yeah, exactly. There's less figurative. It's more sort of abstract shapes and sort of iconography and symbols that he's drawing from his sort of Clahus and Wikino roots, and placing those alongside. But the sort of more figurative elements, the skipper and the dancer and the hunter, they're on the, I guess, on the eastern side. But yeah, Amy, you're right. The whole building is almost like very sort of vessel-like.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with sort of flat iron buildings, like the obviously the famous one in New York. This one is nowhere near as as grand, but it's got that same shape, that kind of triangular shape, and so it kind of looks like a vessel traveling.
Yeah.
Which again sort of takes us back, the title Travelers in the Space Canoe, and this is kind of looks like it's, and we should mention we're on a hill, right? This is the front of this building, which is also the front of the ship, is actually on a slope facing downwards. And so this is, if you were traveling in a canoe back when this was a big creek, before Main Street, this is certainly the direction you would have been heading. Would have been going down the creek towards, as you mentioned, that there was a major confluence for the 3 local host nations at the bottom of this creek, where they met with a large inlet that today we call False Creek. And the area there was called Kiwa-esks, which translates to separated points. And it's where sort of 2 headlands were just partially separated by the inlet where the fresh water met the salt water.
There was an Indigenous tour that I went on of the area around False Creek, where they were talking about how rich the area was of clam beds and fishing and a lot of different things that don't exist today. in that area, like literally whatsoever. In fact, I dragon boat on False Creek, and other than the odd seal that you may see, the joke about being on False Creek is keep your mouth closed or you might catch something, because when you get a mouthful of water as you dragon boat, like it feels like polluted water, like it's just gross water, because all the boats that are in there are just dumping their sewage tanks in the creek, and like it's just gross. So
And it's
man
much
has
better than it
definitely
would have
had a
been.
huge impact.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It was also the heart of Vancouver's heaviest and dirtiest industries for the better part of the century. So it's actually much cleaned up now. You still wouldn't want a mouthful of it, but compared to a mouthful of it in the 1950s, when it was packed with coal-powered plants and pulp and paper mills and sawmills and all those things, and iron foundries, it would have been pretty. Yeah, you can just imagine what these are, people who in their lifetime would have lived through seeing it going from those mud flats and clam beds and fishing grounds to the seat of the heaviest industry in the Lower Mainland.
Ripe with resources to something very different.
Mm-hmm.
Some summers, and I expect there will be more summers like this with climate change, they close the creek to boaters, like not power boaters, but dragon boaters and kayakers and that kind of thing, because the E. coli level is so high that they close the creek because it's not safe to swim in or to be on. Eileen, you've mentioned this term ovoid, and I just was hoping that maybe you could unpack what that is.
I think Allie's a better person to talk about ovoids.
It's funny. I was actually just thinking about this the other day. How do you describe an ovoid? I guess it's sort of like if you had an oval, right, where you have a sort of more like spherical but slightly
so like an egg on its side.
Yeah, but if you took one side of that, one of the long sides of that, and you made it sort of concave, so it actually kind of followed, it was either flat or it actually traced the line on the top side. I don't know if that does that work as an explanation?
It's like a sideways, like a side view of a loaf of bread that's kind of risen up on the bottom as well too. If that makes sense.
A side view of a loaf of bread.
A side view, it always reminds me of like a side view of a loaf of bread, that it would be like if the bottom had also risen up slightly away from the pan, if that makes sense, that sort of shape.
Yeah, so the curve of the
two long
edges,
because it's square on the ends, right? Where the bread would be square.
Yeah, flat on the ends.
And then round at the top and round at the bottom.
Rounded top and bottom kind of thing, yeah.
Okay, I think I got that.
And the curving line along the top and the bottom, so these would be the long edges.
Yeah.
They sort of run parallel to each other.
Yeah.
They have a slight curvature, but they run parallel, versus an egg where they kind of run away from each other and then come back together. These ones actually trace along the same path, but just separated by a short distance.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I got that.
But they're very characteristic of in certain forms of Northwest Coast art.
Yes, exactly. It's particularly like the Northwest Coast, the North Coast style, what they call the form line style. So the Bill Reed would be the most famous artist representing that style, and they aren't generally found in the artwork of the local host nations down here in the unceded territories that we now call Vancouver. And so it's a great way to be able to distinguish when we're trying to counter the idea that there's just this sort of one, pan-Indigenous style on the West Coast. You can usually look to see if there's ovoids. It's probably not from this particular place if you're in Vancouver, right? It's probably come from further north or maybe from Vancouver Island. And actually, when we get to the next mural, I can talk about some of the shapes that you do find that are very distinct to these territories.
Well, let's do that. Let's introduce the next mural. That one is called the Matriarch.
There she is. Yeah. And this mural is by an artist named Siobhan Joseph. Siobhan is a young Squamish Nation woman who is steadily building her reputation as a creator of paintings that she describes as a reflection of both traditional styles of the Indigenous peoples of the northwest coast of British Columbia and more realistic portrayals of animals in particular. And Siobhan's artist statement is, "My piece is called The Matriarch and is inspired by my late mother, Carol Joseph. As the matriarch of my family, she was outspoken, she protested, she loved children, and she believed in taking care of Mother Earth. The vision that came to me," that's to Siobhan, "was a woman in a pose that is welcoming and thanking, with a man and elder woman on each side of her, representing the men and the elders of the community coming together to support her. She is dressed in red to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I placed her in the sea and mountains among the animals to represent connectedness." So this piece covers the entire end wall of the building as we were facing it, as we look at it from across the street. It's about 2 stories high and is the length of, say, 4 cars placed end to end, about 40 paces long. In the upper left corner, there is a bright sunshine yellow sun with its face, the eyes, nose, and O-shaped mouth in bright red. Its triangular beams radiate over the piece. Under it, and slightly to the right, is a swooping gray range of mountain with pointed white clouds surrounding its peaks. In the blue sky, to the right of the mountain, is the image of an eagle embedded in the sky as part of it. A vast forest of light and dark green foliage stretches across the entire piece and surrounds the central figure, a woman wearing a deep red cedar hat and flowing red dress. Her long hair, black on the left side, white on the right, flows down to her hands, which are upheld in greeting, and a white robe cascades from her shoulders. On the left, his back hugging her side, is a man wearing a red cedar hat. He gazes up to the sky, his hands held up in front of him. On the other side of the woman, an elder woman in a bright red cedar hat hugs close to her side, also gazing up to the sky, her arms and eyes lifted. To the left of them is the arching black and gray of an orca's back, its fin rising up out of the water, and to the left of the orca, the deep blue ocean boils, teeming with a host of light blue sea creatures peeping out from its depths as the gray and sand-colored shore creatures butt up against them.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks so much for that description. So this, again, as Eileen mentioned, this is by Siobhan Joseph, who's actually done a few pieces for the festival now. And if you're not, I think we had a few people who aren't from this part of the world who are in the audience today. So just maybe just to explain, she's from the Squamish Nation, and we mentioned at the beginning, Vancouver sits on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. The Squamish are the largest of the 3 local host nations, both as far as the population and also their traditional territories, which span on all the way up to sort of Whistler and Pemberton and across the water over onto the Sunshine Coast as well. And to me, this painting, this is a great example again of how you experience art is so much about the setting as well as the actual piece itself. You know, if you're listening to Tchaikovsky in a symphony, or if you're listening to it as elevator music, you know, when you're going in a department store, you're going to experience it in very different ways. And I think if you were to look at this piece just on a postcard in a gift shop, it'd be a very different experience than seeing it on this scale and in this location, and the way that it interacts with the space. So just off screen here, you don't see this is actually the sort of confluence of 3 major roads. You've got 7th Avenue, Main, and Kingsway, and this kind of, it's actually quite a hazardous sort of 3-way intersection. I remember we had some concerns about, we just want to make sure we got everyone across okay, because there's cars coming from different directions, they have different signals, and not everyone always understands or honors them correctly. But because it's such a high traffic area, it also means that this is so scene, and particularly this gesture. Siobhan has based this figure of the matriarch um, on her mother, who was such an important community figure, with her both hands raised up, which is a traditional sort of welcoming gesture for the Coast Salish peoples. The women would have two hands up, the men have one hand up. And so she's welcoming, as these thousands of cars drive by, as all these pedestrians go by through this major transit point, she's welcoming them onto her territory. But in that act of being welcomed as the subject of that act, you also, in receiving that welcoming, you're also acknowledging that you're on her territory, right? So there's kind of a two-way relationship here. It's a welcoming, but it's also, as part of that protocol, you're also recognizing that you are on unceded territory. So I love the gesture that you're receiving as you come to the great crest of this hill that's very high traffic area. The other thing that really stands out here is the shapes. So in amongst the figures, the animals, the mountains, the clouds, the sun, are shapes that kind of unite them. They're all done with these trigons. And so trigons, if you can picture a triangle, but imagine if you took you held one of those points of that triangle and you just stretched it out and you manipulated it. And so they're all different. There's no sort of uniform trigon shape. They're all based on a triangle, but they might be hooking off to the left or hooking off to the right. They might be long and slender. They might be sort of short and blocky. Trigons are very distinct to Coast Salish artwork. You don't find them in styles like, say, the North Coast, where ovoids are more common. So this is also another sort of marker that this is Coast Salish artwork. This is local. These are the designs and the elements of the people of these lands. And this was actually supposed to be a rotating wall, as in they were gonna, because it's a high traffic area, they thought, wouldn't it be good to have an artist from a different underrepresented community to be featured on here? And so when they painted this back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, the idea was it would be there for a year and then it was going to get painted over and another piece would replace it. But the owner of this building, David Dupree, who we're also going to talk about the next mural as well, he's been an incredible supporter of the art scene in general in Vancouver and of the Mural Festival. When it came time to do the rotating wall, I just said, I'm sorry, I can't paint over it. We're in this moment of reckoning, of reconciliation, of discussions around land back and what that looks like, and I'm not going to cover up the matriarch in this moment. So the festival, obviously, they were happy to honor that. And just one more thing I think is really funny with the setting of this piece. Both Carol and her mother, or sorry, both Siobhan and her mother Carol were very passionate animal rights activists. You see animals always depicted in Siobhan's artwork. And I don't know if you caught, but in the window, this establishment is called Slim's Barbecue. And so right in the middle of this, above the orca, just to the left of the matriarch and the elder and the man, is a sign for Slim's Barbecue. But they also, within the box, it says Slim's Barbecue for vegans and carnivores. So they're also trying to make a bit of a compromise here to appeal to everyone. And I just thought, what a interesting. There was no intention there that this was going to be, this business wasn't there when this mural was painted. It was something else. It was a bar with a different name that's escaping me right now. But when the barbecue joint moved in, I thought, here's another sort of layer of irony with this piece as well.
This the gesture that you're talking about has been explained to us in this space before by Deanna Jestrin, who would join us. She was an intern with us for a long time, and then of course is an artist in residence with us, and has been a guest in this space, and had described that as putting your two hands up with your palms facing forward, and saying all my relations. Mm-hmm. And so she would offer that to us, and it was always very beautiful in this space. And so I think that's what the matriarch is doing here in terms of the welcoming, and then, as you say, the the recognition that now that we know that we've been welcomed, we are recognizing where we are.
Mhm.
Ali, for folks who may not know, I've mentioned this in my land acknowledgements before, but it's been a while since I try to do something a little different every week.
Mm.
The meaning of the term unceded, because I think that that's important given what we're talking about. When we talk
Right.
about the unceded lands.
Yeah. So unceded, basically it means that this land was never ceded over to a colonial power, either through a military defeat or through a treaty process. And in particular, the treaty processes were how most of America was, at least North America, was essentially swindled or dispossessed or acquired, depending on which side of the piece of paper you were on.
Mm-hmm.
And no treaties were signed out here. You'll notice that in a lot of other parts of the space that we now call Canada, a lot of Indigenous people will introduce themselves as being from Treaty Land 6 or Treaty Land 4. They'll reference a specific treaty, which was an agreement that their ancestors would have entered in with the crown. And in the earlier days of contact, these were often the Indigenous nations believed these to be nation-to-nation agreements, right, between their chief or their Tayi or whoever their leader was, and this other chief, back in London or back in Paris. And what became clear quite quickly is that there was a very different understanding of what these treaties meant to the Europeans, right? That these were means to acquire both the lands and the resources therein. And so by the time the colonial powers got out west, which of course was in some cases a couple centuries after this process had started in the East Coast, they were much more wise to it. And so you don't see as many treaties being signed on the West Coast. And so for that reason, this is still considered unceded territory because it was never officially handed over to, in this case, the British.
Thank you. I think that's an important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Shall we move on to our...
Mm-hmm. So if we were to be on the tour, we would turn around and walk a little tiny, just a very short distance, pretty much into the back of, we would turn around and kind of walk, I don't know, 10 steps down the hill, and here we would be suddenly in this the space of the city center motel. So we're in a space. The old city center motel was a motel that was for years. It was considered quite a dive, but was also used as places where they would, film. I remember shooting a film there in one of the motel rooms and things like that. And then Ali can talk a little bit about what actually happened when this became this fabulous space that it was. But what we were looking at as we turn around and go into this space, the Vancouver Mural Festival partnered with Nicola Wealth Real Estate and the Narrow Group to reimagine Mount Pleasant's iconic city center motel into a temporary landmark community space for art and social connection in Vancouver, bringing together vastly divergent styles and backgrounds. So 3 artists, Fiona Ackerman, Casey Hall, and Joon Lee, have transformed the iconic city center motel into a singular mural stretching across all of its surfaces. The artist's approach has intentionally taken the spontaneity of hands-on art making to a massive scale to celebrate, amplify, and deconstruct the architecture of this Vancouver landmark, simultaneously looking at its aesthetics of a classic mid-century motor hotel and its current use as a temporary artist studio. Moving around the 2 buildings and the ground, each artist's direction is brought into focus at different moments, while tactically never relinquishing collaborative ownership from the whole. For the artist, the mural becomes a mirror of what the City Center Artist Lodge aspires to be, a reflection on discovering each other's working processes, being pushed in unexpected directions, and working alongside each other to shape the city. So walking into the parking lot of the space and standing in front of the buildings, it gave me the feeling of being in an aquarium. Every surface, buildings, pavement underneath, covered in swirls and tendrils of color ranging from pastel green, pink, orange, blue, rust brown, in contrast with other hot colors that pop out of this kind of aquatic, swirling three-dimensional world. And then in front of us, down at the end of this stretch of parking lot, building 2 of the 2 islands, because this piece is called Between Two Islands, is 2 stories tall, and the colors on its front swirl from the left side to the right side in pink, yellow, dark green, light green, rusty brown, pink, and bright yellow. The colors have this kind of sun-baked quality to them. And on the end of this building, on the right and left sides, in the corners, there are 2 murals that kind of mirror each other. So on the right side, in the corner that sticks out at 90 degrees, is a panel painted by the artist Casey Hall that features an orca's head poking up from the lower left corner. It has a large black eye centered in a green, earthy, pink, and rust brown face circled in black. It looks to the right. Above it, working up to the top of the piece, are green and rust-colored slashes of paint which look like mountains. Halfway up on the right side is a large pink and rust graffiti-style tag. It has very round edges, as though it's been blown up with air. In the top left corner, peeking out from the mountain, is a bright red sun on a yellow background. On the top at the right is a bright yellow and black graffiti tag which says, "Land Back." Directly behind this piece at the opposite end of the building is its companion panel. In this one, the orca's mouth is outlined in yellow and drops of liquid appear to drip from it. Wisps of black smoke snake up to the height of the panel, almost like seaweed, maybe smoke. Above the orca's head on the right side of the panel is a cut-off image of a pink and rust cube with paint drops dripping from the top. And then if we were to turn around directly in front of us on the other building, building 1, we see huge cacao pods and tropical foliage on bending on bending stems. So it's quite a flowing, working with each other, but really, really different styles of artists here.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most striking. Well, it's actually the largest mural that they've ever done. If you look at the square footage, this just to give people an idea of the size, it's covers over 30,000 square feet of space over these 2 buildings. It completely envelops the 2 buildings that are it's a 2-story motel that's made up of 2 buildings that are in a sort of a T shape with a slight break between between them. And to me, this just represents so many different things. You know, we talked at the first stop about thinking about the city before the city, right? And thinking about how that Main Street used to be this big creek and a ravine, and the symbolism of the canoe to evoke a sort of a very different landscape that was in the same place. And even the City Center Motor Hotel, more recent, but it also evokes a very different time in the city's history, right? And a different time of travel, a different time of accommodation, when people coming into Vancouver weren't flying as often, right? So you would be driving down the highway, you would be coming down the Kingsway, and it would be lined with all these motels for people to stay in. Before you had the big hotels downtown and Airbnbs and all these other things. So it was a real sort of landmark of the neighborhood. And as someone who lives nearby, I always thought there's been so much change in the neighborhood recently. I can't think of another place in Vancouver that's had as much change in the last 10 years as Mount Pleasant. And I always thought when the city center motels, it's the last of that kind of like scrappy old school sort of blue collar East Van, you know, that's left on a scale like this. You know, it takes up a whole block. And when it eventually closed during the pandemic, I thought, that's it, it's gone. It'll be a condo tower, and there goes a bygone era. So imagine my surprise when I came by and I saw these 3 artists doing this incredible artwork on it, and now it has been reborn again, but in a shape that I never would have anticipated. So maybe I can give some background as to what's happened. It's not just the murals themselves. Well, first maybe I'll tell you about who did that. So it's actually 3 artists Fiona Ackerman, Casey Hall, and Joon Lee, as Eileen mentioned. 3 artists who with very different backgrounds, very different styles. Fiona Ackerman was originally from Montreal, though she now calls Vancouver home. Casey Hall is from the Khelsilem Nation, which is further north. He was born in Kitimat, so up on the north coast, and was well versed in that north coast Indigenous style of artwork, the form line style. Spent many years perfecting it before he decided to start doing things to make it his own, like merging it with graffiti and Japanese animation and manga and all these other things. So really, talking about hybridity, really unique style. And Joon Lee, who's originally from Korea, but also now works as an artist in Vancouver with using a lot of different mediums. And so once again, we have that idea of travelers coming through, right? One thing that binds these 3 artists together is none of them are from here. Mm-hmm. And much like the symbolism of the canoe in the first mural, and that the idea of the artist recognizing that he's just passing through, they're also doing that here, and they're literally doing it on an old motel, right, on a place for guests to stay. So we're seeing a bit of a link here, right? Through we had the canoe, we also had the matriarch welcoming us as guests onto her territory, and now we have these artists sort of leaving their imprint on this guest house, right? What happened in this motel after it closed? The site obviously was it sort of shut down. It was sitting there vacant and sort of derelict, and was picked up by a local developer, as happens in Vancouver, very quickly. Who of course have their own plans of what they want to do with the space, which will likely be some kind of mid to high density residential with probably some commercial at street level. But these things don't happen quickly. A development permit with the city and all the various loops that you have to jump through to before you can actually build something often takes several years. And in that time, this is going to sit here vacant. And so along with being creative with the sort of visual aspect of the space, right, by giving it this rebirth, we're also being creative around how could we use this space in the meantime, right? We've lost about 500,000 square feet of artistic space in the last 10 years in Vancouver due to development pressures, due to gentrification, due to evictions. And so we have to start thinking maybe sideways and looking at different ways that we can leverage some of these spaces that aren't being used. And so they approached David Dimitri, who also owned the space that we saw before this, where the Matriarch was hosted. And he owns a bunch of really great sort of night spots, sort of bars and speakeasies and restaurants and nightclubs. And one of the ways that he gets to do really cool things with buildings that other groups can't do is because he generally takes over leases that are short, because the buildings are likely going to be torn down soon. And so because they're short-term leases, they're generally cheaper. And because they're cheaper, he can go in and do something a bit more creative and a bit more fun. And he's not worried about some big long-term investment. He just wants to have some fun with that space. And so he approached the developer who bought this site and said, I know you're sitting on that development permit. It's going to take you a few years. Did you know that the city looks very positively when you provide a community amenity back? And they'll often take that into consideration when they're granting you your development permit. So if you requested this many floors and this many units and condominiums versus rental, or this split between affordable rentals or non-market rentals and market rentals, they will often give you a bonus in this regard, more profitability, the more that you give back to the community, right? And wouldn't it be great if I could turn that motel into all those motel rooms into 75 low rent artist studios for a minimum of 3 years while you go through this development application process? And then we'll look after the building for you, right? You're not going to have squatters. You're not going to have, it's going to be it's not going to get damaged because there's going to be people working in there every day. Mm-hmm. And in return, you get to provide a great community service for the artist scene, because who are really at a loss for space right now. And they went for it. Like, sure, that's great. And so he approached the festival and said, hey, I got this motel. Let's fill it with artists. And would the festival help recruit and help fund and pay for some artists to paint it up? And they did it, and out came this incredible result. One thing that David did not do was tell the city that this is what he was doing. And this is a change of use, and a change of use is that's basically you have to go through an
You need
application.
permission.
Yeah, you have to get permission, right? It's like a rezoning essentially, right? Because you're changing the use of the land. But to do that, they're gonna have to also wait. It could be years, and we need spaces now, and the space is sitting empty now. So he just went and filled it. And when the city caught on and they came and did an inspection, like, you realize you can't just go and stick a bunch of artists in an old motel that's undergoing a development application. It's like, well, this is your massive arts and culture plan that you published in 2020 called Culture Shift, where you pledged to not just save hundreds of thousands of square feet of artistic space in the city that's being quickly bought up and redeveloped, but also even to create new space as well. And so far, you've done very little of that. Part of that was because of COVID and other things, but I went and did it for you. I've got 75 rooms that are being rented out as studios to artists with all different backgrounds, including artists from the downtown east side, including artists from a range of sort of socioeconomic backgrounds, including artists who would have a very hard time finding space to create. Otherwise, are you really going to turf us out at this point? And they realized that would be a bad look, and he got his permission retroactively.
Yes.
Awesome.
So it's a very creative piece, and it's also a very creative use of the space. And it's a good example that artists aren't just the people who are making the artwork, but a lot of times they're the ones who are coming up with very sort of resourceful ways to just get by and claim space in a city like Vancouver.
Better to ask forgiveness than permission.
There's no better example of that saying than what he's done here.
How much longer do these artists have in this space?
I think we're on the final year.
Yeah.
It's a minimum of 3 years. But that also depends. As long as the development application is ongoing, then they're not going to kick them out, right? It's not until basically they are ready to break ground. So some of David's other properties, like he has another bar just down the street called the Narrow, which is one of the best bars in Vancouver. It's really reminiscent of a sort of Lower East Side New York, Lower East Side Manhattan kind of dive bar, those long, narrow, dark bars that we don't have enough of in Vancouver. And it's in a space that he gets a cheap lease because it's a property it's had a development application in. I think he thought he was going to hold on to it for 2 or 3 years, and he's had it for almost 10 years now. So a lot of times these owners just want to sit on the space and speculate and wait till they get the right conditions. And at least in this case, we get to do something fun with it in the meantime.
Yep. Yeah. Very cool. All right.
Thanks for that. I like you, Amy, I learned so much from Ali whenever I get to hang out with him.
So much.
So great.
I mean, I live in, Metro Vancouver area, but I don't live in this area. So it's just really nice to, even if it was in like 3 blocks from me, there'd be so much I don't know. So this is great.
Well, I think a big part of understanding this is also understanding what goes on behind the scenes to make this possible. A lot of people just think we show up with paintbrushes one day and paint a wall. There's often 6 months to a year of negotiations and engagement that's gone on with the property owner, with the tenants, with the local community, matching that to the artist, right? You have different drafts that have been submitted to the festival when they've done their call out. And then the curators sort of go forward and approach different property owners and say, at the end of the day, they're donating this space, right? They're not paid to host it, but also not paying to host it. So you have to find the right partnership there. And often, some pieces it's straight away, but sometimes, particularly if it's a more political piece or a challenging piece, you really have to work hard to find the right space and the right partner.
All right, I'm ready for the next one.
Mm-hmm. So if we were to walk out from here and go around the corner, around the back of where the alleyway behind this motel would be, this is where our next piece is. So this is around the back of this motel. And this mural is called "Is This Our Land?" ? The artist is Khelsilem. The mural depicts two thunderbirds wrestling around the sun with a conversation in Squamish and Hunkaminam, the two Indigenous languages of Vancouver shared between the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. The sentence says the same thing, "Is this our land?" The piece was created in the context of the Vancouver Mural Festival to create conversation around a variety of issues at play around land rights, reconciliation, Indigenous visibility, gentrification, and more. So the artist, Khelsilem, is a Squamish Kwakwakwa independent creative professional. He was born and raised in the Squamish homelands on the North Shore of Vancouver. He's been active in the social, political, and cultural movement to reclaim nearly extinct Indigenous languages in British Columbia. He's the founder of university education programs focused on the revitalization of his people's language. In late 2017, he was elected as a councillor with the Squamish Nation Council and then appointed as spokesperson for the Squamish Nation Council, representing 4,050 plus Squamish people, and a board member with he's also a board member with the Kwi-At Stelmek. This piece is very long. It's about 80 paces long, running most of the length of the back of the motel parking lot that we've just come from. The artwork's deep blue background starts at about shoebox height on the right end and gradually increases to the height of a tall person, about 6 feet tall, as we make our way downhill towards the piece's left-hand side. In the upper left corner of the piece, in stark white letters, the height of a wall poster, are the words in the Squamish language, which means, "Is this our land?" This text extends along the wall about 2 car lengths. Where the text ends, about 2 feet from the ground, another text begins, this time in Hunkaminam, saying the same thing. Both of these texts mean, "Is this our land?" The characters are different because of 2 different languages. Swooping around light blue circular suns are multiple sets of 2 sky blue thunderbirds, each set chasing each other, beak to toes. The many pairs loop around, behind, over, and under the text and fly along its length and beyond, giving the feeling of the conversation going on and on and on.
Yeah, this is a unique piece for bringing language into the conversation around decolonization and land back and reconciliation. And I love the way that it has the 2 different languages sort of juxtaposed against each other or talking to each other, and then you have the 2 thunderbirds swirling around the sun. I just sort of picture that they're having that conversation, right? And these are almost like speech bubbles coming out of them. And within those thunderbirds, you'll also see some of those shapes that were there with the matriarch as well, the trigons, the crescents. So again, really marking this with the symbols of the Coast Salish people, marking that this is artwork that comes from this land. And that's important because the next piece we're going to talk about is from the North Coast. And here we actually get the 2 styles right next to each other, so you can appreciate the contrast between them. The artist Khelsilem, if you're local, you may actually recognize the name. More recently, he's sort of become the spokesperson for the Squamish Nation, particularly around the Sinop development, the large-scale development in Khelsilem, where the Squamish Nation, they recently won, I think, 11 acres of their traditional lands back right in the heart of the city, and they're doing a massive development. They're going to put, I think, 6,000 rental units and towers there. And he's sort of become the spokesperson for that. So he's much busier now than he was back in 2017 when this was done. But language has always been one of Khelsilem's passions. And as Eileen mentioned, he was one of the founders of a Squamish immersion program at the Simon Fraser University, so people could come and learn the language. And for him, that's such a key element to keeping the culture alive, because of course language shapes thought, right? How we conceptualize things is often, well, it's not often, it is framed by the words sort of make the web, the net that we sort of stretch over our mind, and how we conceptualize something, including land, right? and territory and ownership and property. And it's always fascinating when you're talking to someone whose native language is something else, and they're like, "I'm trying to, how do I explain this to you? You don't have a word in your language to describe this." Right? I get this a lot. My wife is from Egypt, so I've been learning Arabic for the last 2 years, and once in a while you hit a word, and they're like, "Oh no, there is no there's no direct translation. We're going to have to really really try to describe this for you." And so you really get that sense with when you're looking at Squamish and Hunkaminam and learning place names. And for me as a guide, one of the most important things, as a settler in these lands, is to learn the place names and the terminology of different things. I think it's one of the most sort of foundational ways to be a respectful guest. And I love learning the place names around the Lower Mainland, because what you'll always find with both Hunkaminam and Squamish is they describe the place. So they're actually evoking what was there. So just at the foot of what is now Main Street, when you would have hit False Creek, you had, I think I mentioned earlier, Kiwa-esques. Kiwa-esque was the separated points. There were two headlands facing each other where the water would come in and out at low and high tide through the mud flats. The body of water that we call False Creek was called Squatches. Squatches means the deep hole underneath. And they would call it that because when the tide would go out from False Creek and you had those mud flats where they would go and pick clams and things, fresh water would actually bubble up through the mud. And they could tell that this was different water. They could see, like, it was brackish, but it was fresh. It wasn't salt water. And so they knew that there was something down below, a deep hole. It turns out there's a natural aquifer that runs all the way over to Burnaby Lake. But in their language, they were telling us that story, long before we were doing geological surveys and things like that. Pukcha, the floating whale's back, was another landmark just further west. One of my favorites, right where the Fraser, the Stalo River, meets the Pacific Ocean, was called Tutsalit, and it means always rough water. Right, you had the currents from the river hitting the ocean. Tutsalit, always rough water. So when you learn those, you're not just learning the terminology; you're actually also having a picture of that landscape being drawn for you, of what was here. And to me, that is so powerful, and such a different relationship than just naming things after British boat captains and railwaymen, right? Or golf courses in Scotland, which is what we have. Like 12 streets in our city are named after golf courses in Scotland. Very different relationship to place.
Yeah. Sigh.
And these pieces are all leading up into each other, right? They're kind of all connected. This is this our land, and leads up into these next pieces.
Yeah. This next one, is butted right up against it. Like the tallest part of "Is This Our Land" leads into it gets to be about 1 story high, and then butted right up against it is the next piece, which is 2 stories high, which is the back end of the motel.
Mm-hmm. So, and actually, this is probably a good place to transition.
Yeah. So this next piece is called Eagle Box Opens Up, and the artist is Paul Windsor. So it is literally at the right side of it, butts right up against the one we just talked about. The house design split eagle box represents everything negative and positive, balancing negative and positive spaces and opening up with the guidance of an eagle, revealing the moment of spirit, bringing healing and nourishment to the soul. The artist wanted to create an indirect positive impact on viewers of this mural. The artist Paul intended this piece to be healing through its form, flow, color, and aesthetic. He explains it is a bright side as strong as he can express it through the art of his culture. Paul explains homes, healthy functioning homes, are safe, sober, clean, strong, and productive, loyal, nurturing, and unified, like this design. In line with Paul Windsor's interest in intergenerational connection, his mural was painted with the assistance of kids from the Urban Native Youth Association. So Paul Windsor was born and raised in Kitimat, British Columbia, which is in the interior, quite a bit north of Vancouver, and currently resides in Vancouver. He began drawing as a young child and is an ancestral designer who comes from a family of artists. Paul also has a large interest in music and a love for the planet. His paintings, typically on the mediums of paper and wood, frequently feature positive imagery depicting the natural world. Paul's artistic motivation stems from a drive to bring people together from different generations from his culture. At the left edge of this mural, This Is Our Land, is the next. At the left edge of This Is Our Land is this next piece of artwork. At the back of the motel, on the side of the end building, about the width of 3 vans parked end to end and 2 stories high, it looks like the side wall of a house. The whole upper half of the mural is taken up by an eagle, its form inside the span of a warm brown hand and arm, with the slightly splayed fingers and the thumb extending downward, forming the eagle's wing and tail out to the right. On the back of the hand and each of the fingers are earthy red and white ovoids, which form the feathers. The eagle faces to the left, with its white head and large black eye and red cheek extending up the arm. Its bright red beak is curving down. Below the eagle's beak, swooping across a white sky, are 4 bright yellow hummingbirds with long, slender bodies and needle-thin black beaks, each with a different colored dot on their wing, red, green, white, or black. To their right are 6 round purple flowers with red and pink markings and 2 small green leaves which vibrate on either side of the flowers like small wings. The flowers arch over a blue wave which leaps up from the ocean under them, and under this wave is a large black and white swimming salmon with its thin red tongue showing in its open mouth. To the left of the salmon are 3 round coral-colored pieces of roe, which appear to have been laid in the ocean by another salmon swimming in the lower left corner of the piece. The mural is separated into 3 distinct sections, kind of like the layer of a cake.
So Paul Windsor is from the north coast. He's of mixed Haisla and Heiltsuk background, but now lives in Vancouver. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is a great sort of counterpoint to Khelsilem's piece, because you have the range of the 2 styles, literally right next to each other. But there's some great. They're sort of stylistically they're different enough that you can actually see the different shapes. This one has a lot of ovoids now that we know what ovoids are. In fact, all of the eagle, the hummingbirds, the salmon, the water bugs, they've all got ovoids in some part of them. Just like all of the thunderbirds in Khelsilem's piece all had trigons and crescents, which are the coast sailor symbols. So each of them are really celebrating those symbols that they use. And really drawing on them to sort of stamp their identity, where they're coming from, whether these are the Squamish pieces or whether these are North Coast pieces. There's a couple things that tie these together. One is the idea of preservation, cultural preservation, and where Khelsilem was looking at language specifically, Paul Windsor is really inspired by the concept of intergenerational knowledge and intergenerational knowledge transfer. And I think he mentioned that in the write-up that you just relaying, Eileen, right? That he's the sort of transfer of knowledge between generations with his people, and you really see that coming through here, because if you could hear in the description, all of these different animal groups have several different figures in them and their families. Right, so there's 3 hummingbirds, there's 6 or 7 water bugs, there's 2 salmon, but below the salmon there are eggs. So there's roe, there's the young ones, and so in each of these cases, the eagle box that is located above all of them, it's taking up the top frame of the mural. It along with sort of balance and stability and home, it also represents that body of cultural knowledge, right, of wisdom. And then it's getting passed down through all of these multi-generational animal groups, through the birds and the water bugs and the salmon. So whereas Khelsilem's focusing more on the linguistic side of sort of cultural heritage and preservation, Paul Windsor's looking at more holistically, like the whole sort of body of knowledge. And the other thing that ties these together is they both had children involved in their production, which is great. I didn't mention that on the last piece, but actually it's great because we can mention it. Both of these were done in partnership with the Urban Native Youth Association, or UNYA. Khelsilem's piece was all done with stencils, both the lettering for the Squamish and Hunkaminam words, but also the thunderbirds that were circling around the sun are all done with stencil. And he opted for stencil because he thought it'd be really easy to get children involved. You just have to hold it up against the wall and let them, go at it with the spray paint can, and it's pretty easy to get up there. And Paul also had children involved in this. The very bottom section below the salmon, there's some streams of kelp and seaweed and fish eggs, and it actually goes right off the building and onto the roadway, which they were not supposed to do, but that's okay. Nobody got in trouble. And the idea behind this is get children involved, Indigenous children involved in producing, like, the artwork, but also this really to instill this sense of cultural esteem, right? We are putting these designs back into our landscape. And so it was a good artistic endeavor, but I think it also had a lot of, like, a very sort of powerful cultural practice as well, that we could go and put this on these buildings and on these streets.
That must have been so much fun, the whole process of doing that. I would love it if there was a film or something of that process with all the kids and the artists and.
Yeah, they've actually done a lot. Quite a few of the pieces that have been done with Indigenous artists have been done in collaboration with Indigenous youth associations. And they always wanted to. The festival always wanted to make sure that they were. If there were other groups who were doing great things, they didn't want to try to jump over them. They was like, maybe we can help you. Maybe we can help boost your capacity. Like, we could provide funding, or we could get you the permits from the city, or we could go talk to some building owners and help you do something rather than we just do it ourselves. And particularly the relationship with UNYA has been really great. They've partnered on quite a few pieces.
This one was particularly interesting for me on the day because because we were in an alleyway and there wasn't anything obstructing you from getting really close to the wall. I could literally go and put my nose and my hands on the walls. So, and some of the images are painted quite low, so I could get really close to seeing with my partial some of the way the Indigenous cultural shapes were that you've been talking about, which is like if you're standing across a street and you have some partial and you're trying to look at them and pick them out, for me that's near impossible to do. But I really got a much better appreciation of that from being able to get that close.
Yeah, it's a whole other way of experiencing the work again.
Yeah,
that's so amazing.
Yeah. And once again, like Ali, you were talking about, in this, I think the day that we went, there was no construction going on across from there, which there was when I originally went to go and observe the piece. And when my partner and I came back and looked at, there was all this construction and mayhem and all that kind of stuff going on. So it once again, like experiencing the piece in that kind of setting was different again than, when there's a little bit more quiet. I mean, I think there were still some cars that went through while we were there. So you never kind of you certainly are not experiencing it in like an austere gallery setting or anything like that. Very much a sense of there's a lot of stuff going on around us. So just to try and focus on that piece.
Yeah, it's it's one of the most challenging spaces to do the tour right now. It has been for sort of 3 years since they've been right across the alleyway. They're putting up a huge tower. West Bank and Hootsuite are partnering on a mega development there. It's a 3-site development that goes 3 blocks long. So that's, again, we're coming back to the idea that the setting is also very important, not just the artwork. And when we're talking about cultural preservation, and Paul Windsor is really, when he's not doing murals, he illustrates children's books. He's a rapper. I have a 2-year-old. I actually have quite a few Indigenous art books that I read to my son, and Paul Windsor has artwork in all of them. But he's very dismayed by that rupturing of the intergenerational knowledge transfer process. For him, a lot of it's come through colonialism, but I think for all of us, it's also happened just through our sort of the modern contemporary way of life, right? Not a lot of intergenerational households anymore. It's pretty rare. Very often your other generations or your distant family don't live in the same city or even in the same country, or in my case, my son's grandparents and aunts and uncles are on a different continent for both sides of his family. So, and you kind of get that when you're trying to take this in, and there's construction and hammers clamoring and cement trucks, and it's almost like you're feeling that tension, right? There's the modern sort of modernism versus tradition, and it's a real challenge to take it in. So again, we were really blessed that day that we had a rare moment of calm in that alleyway, and it wasn't the usual flow of trucks. And yeah, I've been yelled at quite a few times by the foreman on that work site, to get that group out of there, it's not safe, like we didn't have it that day.
Okay, I'm noticing the time, folks, so I think let's move on to the next mural.
Okay. As we would walk down this same alley and into the next block, our next mural is called Thirsty. This is an artist named iHeart. And this mural, a stencil piece of a child posing for many selfies, which is typical of iHeart's tendency to create social commentary through his work. Many of his pieces examine the growing role of social media in our world and are produced as graffiti. In this case, a child is getting sustenance through a Tetra Pak juice box, but also seeks additional validation and meaning through likes and views online. The juice box has an apple on it, perhaps echoing iHeart's name as a satire of a major electronics company. iHeart is a Canadian street artist based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. Using stencils, iHeart emphasizes the dark side of society's obsession with technology. By bringing these digital elements into the street, he obscures the boundary between life on and offline. So this piece is on a buff yellow background. It's about 6 feet tall and is the width of a single car garage, so perhaps 20 feet. All over the yellow background are white hashtag numerical symbols, icons, interspersed with white @ symbols and blue and white circular like check marks. In the center of the mural is a graphic novel style image of a child with very white skin. Their straight black hair is cut in a blunt page boy style with thick bangs. They have on huge yellow star-shaped sunglasses with blue lenses, which obscure their eyes and cover half of their face. The child's head is tilted to their left, so their hair swings to the side, and they support their head on the fingers of their left hand. The child wears an oversized, loose, woolly, burgundy red pullover sweater. Their right hand is holding a large blue Tetra Pak juice box with an apple on it and a straw poking out of it. The child is sucking on the straw with puckered black tinted lips. The child's tilted head gazes up at 3 cell phones taped to selfie sticks placed to the right, left, and almost directly in front of them. In contrast to the flat storybook drawn quality of the child, the phones seem to pop out of the surface of the mural in 3D.
So iHeart has become quite a globally famous stencilist graffiti artist. I think again a style that was made sort of world famous by Banksy, the artist out of Bristol. And Banksy actually is a big fan of iHeart's work. One of our guides was just at a Banksy exhibit last year in Belgium, and the only other artist whose pieces were featured alongside it, who'd been selected by Banksy, was iHeart. So just give you an idea that we're sometimes Vancouver often doesn't appreciate its sort of cultural figures, and in this case, we have someone who's getting sort of world recognition as someone who does some great satire, really dark sort of satire around again our sort of obsession with technology, and almost like Black Mirror, if you're familiar with the Black Mirror television series. iHeart's work would really fit in that, with that theme, and just looking at the sort of what are some of the unintended consequences about these tools, these technologies that, remember, they were supposed to bring us together, right? The idea behind these apps and these things initially was that they were going to connect people and connect people from different parts of the world, maybe from different walks of life, and they could come together through these apps. And what we've seen instead is, of course, division and polarization, and in particular the impact that it has on young people, on their self-esteem, on their body image, on their expectation about what life should look like or be like. And all these things are drawn into iHeart's work, and you get that sense here. And what really strikes me with this piece is, at first it seems really fun. On first impression, you're like, oh, it's just a child having some fun, playing around with their juice box. They've got these sort of fun novelty star glasses that they're wearing, sort of like a Hollywood star would do on the Hollywood Boulevard. And then it starts to sink in more, like that it's almost more this sort of desperate attempt for validation and for meaning that comes through likes and views and things, and but ultimately it kind of leaves you bereft, sort of barren of any real sustenance. And so it's humorful, and it's also terrifying, I think. And I think that's where iHeart talent lies.
There is such a great juxtaposition between the cheerful colors and this idea of, I don't know, maybe how scary the world could be if we were all just interacting with our phones all day long. Because you're kind of in another world altogether if that's all you do. You're not living IRL. Oh, like the kids, we're not living in real life. So there is a
you're not having mindfulness. You're not.
Yeah.
You're
not really connecting with another human in the same way, and I think that has it will remain to be seen in 100 years what kind of toll that takes on humanity. If we're around in 100 years, that's a whole other climate change conversation, but it will remain to be seen what kind of toll that takes on our species.
I think one last really neat element, and I'm conscious of the time, one last element here that, again, coming back to our theme of how the setting is important, it's looking at it in this location is very different than if you were looking at this in a gallery, is the interplay with with the wall itself. And so directly above, it's a pretty irregular wall. There's a heating, an air vent in the middle of it. There's a door, and all these have been painted over and sort of
very industrial.
Yeah. But right above the child's head is a spotlight, right? It's a motion activated spotlight for security. And so in the nighttime, when the office closed, if you walk by, that spotlight will come on. And it's so fascinating because the mural is depicting a child who's pretending that they're in front of paparazzi.
Yeah.
Right. And the flashing lights, the paparazzi. And actually, if you walk by this at night, you will activate that light coming on, and it will almost be like the light is flashing from the cameras in this child's face. So you're almost fulfilling their wish, right, to be the center of the attention.
It makes me wonder, and I'm sure in any of these spaces, how much the artist
Mhm.
how much the space influences the art or the artist's, inspiration for what they want to put on each particular wall or space or whatever they're given to paint on.
Mhm. It really it depends on the artist. The more sort of maybe experienced or adaptable they are. iHeart, someone who knows how to work in these settings. They have always worked in alleyways. It's not
Yeah.
like the other murals who are people who've come to it from gallery backgrounds, or maybe they've been carvers, or maybe they do graphic design in a on a laptop in a nice cozy
Right.
office. So iHeart has always worked around the space, but you don't always see that. Sometimes the artists they'll get sort of flummoxed by, oh, I've got a pipe sticking out here. I don't know if you remember the first year we did the tour, there's a mural that has a butterfly over
Yeah,
a woman's
Yeah.
face,
was just thinking of
and
that.
there's a pipe sticking out of the wall. And the artist at the last minute decided to center the the butterfly around the pipe, and so that the pipe was actually the feeder.
The
Like that was
provocative.
the little tube that comes out of the butterfly's mouth when it's trying to
Yeah,
drink nectar or something. And so it was this ugly old pipe coming out of a building all of a sudden became this
beautiful thing. Yeah,
this
Pretty cool.
nectar seeking body parts. It was really cool.
yeah, cool.
And I think this next one's our last one, hey?
It is. So, yeah, turning around and walking down the road about a block from here, we have our final mural called The Reflection. Here it is. Artist is Dimitri Sirenko. And the info we have on this mural is a quote from an author that this work is based around. We have no need for other worlds. We need mirrors. We don't know what to do with other worlds. A single world, our own, suffices us, but we can't accept it for what it is. Stanislav Lem, and the book is called Solaris. The Reflection celebrates Polish writer Stanislav Lem on the 100th anniversary of his birth. It's inspired by his acclaimed science fiction novel Solaris, which came out in 1961, which follows a crew of scientists on a research station as they attempt to understand extraterrestrial intelligence. The piece incorporates subtle symbology to reflect the concept of looking inward rather than outwards to foster peace and deeper understanding for ourselves and for our home planet Earth. It also includes symbols of the writer's Jewish roots, local First Nations, and Poland. So about the artist, the mural titled Reflection has been painted by Dimitri Sirenko, a Ukrainian-born Canadian artist. This is his first ever time painting a mural, and the Mural Festival is delighted to have him participating artist in this year's festival. Dimitri developed his formal artistic background at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, majoring in design after pursuing a career in animation and video games and art direction. Dimitri began to switch his focus to more traditional art forms, developing a love for painting. This is painted on a brick wall, 1 story high and about 3 cars wide. This piece of art is filled with a tumbling mass of dark blue and seaweed green ocean waves tipped with white foam. Rising up out of a tidal wave of blue water, in the center is a massive silver head and shoulders encased in an astronaut's helmet with a domed blue visor and round orange ear protectors. Stretching forward from the left shoulder, the left arm of the figure is encased in silver fabric and ends in an upheld hand with its huge fingers slightly cupped and reaching forward. Orange cuffs with a small Polish flag embedded in the middle are worn on each arm. The figure from the sea is reaching towards a rectangular gray metal platform. It looks like a drilling rig platform or maybe a spaceship landing pad with a futuristic menorah etched into its side. It sits on 7 metal legs which extend into the boiling sea. On the platform stands the tiny figure of a person clothed identically to the large figure. The uniformed person's right arm extends toward the massive figure in the sea. In the churning green waves along the bottom of the piece, there are fish swimming, nature in contrast with the very high-tech, futuristic sci-fi look of the rest of the piece.
Yeah, is this piece has a lot of layers. I've grown to really appreciate. I mean, it always looked great, but the more that I've come to sort of sit with this piece, the more I just think it's such a fantastic. And I often end my tours here, so it's fitting that we're making this our last piece here. When I do the regular tours, I often end here too, because I feel like um, it leaves you with a lot to think about. So as Eileen mentioned, this is it's inspired by the book Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. Stanislaw Lem was a Polish science fiction writer and philosopher. Really sat in that sort of space between literary critic and writer and philosopher, that maybe like Carl Sagan or something like that would have a kind of a similar role um, in our culture, but was just a sort of cultural icon in Poland. And the Polish consulate actually reached out to the festival for this piece and said, "Hey, we'd really like to celebrate Polish culture. If you could help find us a wall, we'll pay for a mural." And so that's often a relationship that happens with the festival, is a, a different group. Sometimes it's not often a consulate, sometimes a consulate, sometimes it'll be more like a community organization who will come along and say, "Hey, we would love some representation in the streets. Could you help us out?" And they'll sort of figure out what the best arrangement is, who's going to take care of what. And so they agreed with the consulate that they would go find a space and get the permits, and the consulate would provide the funding and find an artist. After all that, they couldn't actually find a Polish artist. So they went with Dimitri Sirenko, who is from just over the border in Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine, but now lives in Vancouver and went to Emily Carr. And so they decided to use a scene from Solaris, because that is Stanislaw Lem's most famous work. There's an amazing rendition of it in a 1976 film. There's also a Hollywood version with George Clooney that came out not too long ago. But the whole idea is that these astronauts, they're on this alien planet, on the other side of the galaxy, and they've got to try to use all of their wits and their wherewithal to figure out a solution to get out. And they're always looking externally, much like humanity. We're always focused on outside spaces, on filling in every last piece of the map and going to every last corner of the ocean and off to the moon. And but we're not very good at looking inward, right? There's not a lot of introspection or reflection, and that is the root of a lot of our problems. We have this incredible capacity and ability to go to all these places, but because we're not really centered in ourselves, we don't end up doing very good things with them. And so in this mural, this astronaut is staring off into this alien landscape with this wave rapidly approaching, and then reflected back in the wave is themselves, to sort of send the message that you need the answer for your problems is inside you. It's not out here. And there's also very coded symbols, as Eileen mentioned. There's I love what Dimitri did here with the sort of subtle semiotics. So it's sort of almost engraved into the spaceship, into the metal shell, outer casing of the spaceship, is a menorah. And he wanted to acknowledge that Stanislaw Lem was a Jewish writer in Poland in the early 20th century, at a time when anti-Semitism was rife, and thinking about the sort of notions of identity, and how identity is complicated. It's not always one thing. In fact, it's never really one thing. And sometimes different parts of your identity can be in tension with each other. And so today he's celebrated as a Polish writer, but at the time, he would also sometimes in a sort of very tenuous position within Poland, for also being Jewish. So that's coming through with this sort of subtle hint of the menorah coming from the spaceship. And Dimitri also wanted to acknowledge again where this painting was being done on. So within this sort of wave, this waterscape that's advancing towards the spaceship and the astronaut with the reflection, one of the lower waves on the bottom right hand of the mural is a smaller wave that's just cresting. It's just starting to break, and it's within the wave, it's become sort of almost translucent. You can see into the water, and it's an alien world, but it's a very salmon-looking like fish inside this wave in this salmon world, and so it's sort of hearkening to where we are now. And if you look really closely in the detail of the wave, it's taking the shape of an eagle. There's the wave, the spray coming off the wave is actually turning into wings and a beak. And so the eagle is coming, sort of swooping down in the form of the water to pluck up the salmon. And that's his land acknowledgement, basically. That's his way of saying that he's looking at all of these different processes, outer space, exploration, inner reflection, Polish identity, Jewish identity, but he's doing it here on Coast Salish lands. And he's acknowledging it through that eaglet fish in the water.
I would never in a million years notice either of those two things. Like just with my partial, never. I never see it. So I'm really glad that you all were able to point those out. It's very cool.
It took me a few viewings of it. And actually I showed up, I was doing a tour one day when they were just finishing up, and the representatives from the consulate were also there. They were sort of having a celebration drink in front of the wall because they were just putting the final touches on. And we got this full rendition from the consular staff and the artist about and that is who pointed out the menorah and the eagle.
So you got insider information.
Yes. Yeah, most of the mural stops we've been able to speak with the artists or the curators or somebody to get some of that info. But this was a pretty special moment to just happen to walk by with a large tour group when the artist and the funders were there.
Cool.
That's awesome. Okay, I think we can take this particular photo down of that mural. I mean, this was a lovely walk down memory lane, literally. And for some folks, their first time witnessing some of these murals in the Mount Pleasant area on this particular tour. Now, Ali, maybe you can remind us. I think, what was it? There's over 300 murals in Vancouver. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's even more. Yeah, I think it might
More?
be getting more now. I'm not sure what the total count is now, but it's over 300 now.
Yeah, there's a huge number of murals, and this was like 7.
I mean, those are official murals that have been done through the Mural Festival. That doesn't include, of course, all the other murals that have been done independently. But that's just that have been done through the festival since 2016.
Since 2016. Any idea how many murals they curate per year? So like per festival?
It really varies.
Yeah.
Actually, the most productive years were the COVID years as far as murals, being number of murals, because nothing else was going on. So if you're not familiar with the festival, there's usually a whole bunch of programming that happens alongside it. There's concerts and artist talks and all kinds of events, and it used to culminate with this sort of 20 block long street party that shut down 20 blocks of one of the busiest streets in the city to traffic, like shut off the traffic, and all that took a lot of resources, takes a lot of staffing, takes a lot of funding to get that done. And because none of that can be done during the first 2 years of COVID, all those resources went into the art. And so they went from making usually 20 to 30 murals. I think they did 60 murals the first year of COVID that summer. I guess it was 2019 or 2020. Now it's actually been reduced a lot. The last year was the least that they'd done. And I noticed that this year, the festival used to be 2 or 3 weeks long, and this year it's just one long weekend. So I think like a lot of arts you referenced this at the beginning of our session today, funding has become a challenge.
Well, it's because we were all given COVID funding. Not all of us, but people who were able to take advantage of COVID funding did. And then we developed new programs and did new things, and all of a sudden it's like no more COVID funding, and you're like, oh, but we are doing successful things, and now how do we continue to fund those things? So that's part of the challenge, right? Which sucks. But I suppose is a reality, because I was going to ask you how the festival in your opinion has changed over the last several years, but you're sharing it right now, is that it's gone from this stretch of a couple of weeks to a week to a long weekend.
I honestly, I don't know what I haven't spoken to anyone about it this
Yeah.
year. Just saw
Yeah.
the dates. And there might be other things. Maybe they're just deciding to be really hyper focused in that in a shorter period.
Perhaps. Yeah.
But I'm sure that just knowing the funding landscape all around,
Yeah.
I'm sure that has something to do with it as
Yeah.
well. And they've also, Brett, they're doing other things now. There's a Winter Arts Festival that does a lot of it's in the winter, so it's you're not going to be doing a lot of painting. So there's a lot of mixed media, a lot of things like projections and lasers, and playing with different mediums. That also could be where a lot of the sort of resources are going now.
Yeah. And we're talking about like in outdoor spaces, right?
Yeah, as
Yeah.
well as a few pop-up indoor spaces, but the majority.
I think I remember hearing about this. Oh, I can't remember.
They lit up like Canada Place and
Yeah,
BC
that's what it
Place
was, where people brought their chairs and there was like a light show or something on the side of yeah. A lot of talk about
BC
this stuff.
Place had they were lighting up BC Place in the form of different Coast Salish weaving patterns.
Yeah.
So again, an idea of like transmitting Coast Salish artistic culture, but doing it in finding new ways to do sort of ancient.
And I think there was a couple of virtual reality things that were happening too, which I thought was cool, except anybody who's legally blind can't really take advantage of virtual reality.
Mm.
You need two good working eyes for that kind of stuff, mostly. Anyways, okay, cool. I want to make sure that folks in this space have a chance to ask any questions if they want to, share any reflections, or if you were there on the day of this walking tour, if you want to share what you experienced on the day, that's also welcome in this space. In the meantime, I know we're planning another walking tour again in August, so that'll be fun if you're interested in coming in a live in-person walking tour led by our very own in this space. We'll keep you updated on the date of that once we confirm with Eileen and Allie that they're available on that date. I think that will be exciting to be able to do another walking tour with y'all.
Absolutely.
How much prep does it take, Eileen, to from your perspective for description to
it's kind of interesting because it's like with theater, you have to go and experience the artwork and stand there and avoid cars and and I go and I record audio, like my notes and my impressions and things like that, and try and take pictures and things like that. And so it takes a couple of times going in situ to where the artwork is. And just again, then I come home and have a good think about it, and then just try and think about impressions about what it meant to me and what I can see and that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's fair.
I don't know. I never count the hours, Amy. It's kind of an immersive experience.
Yeah. That makes total sense. I do notice we have a hand from Megan and then from Rita. So let's go to Megan and then we'll go to Rita.
Oh, there we go. I haven't got working this time. Anyway, I love it when you mentioned the Polish writer that wrote Solaris. I have the audiobook and with the ocean and everything. I noticed that. When is the next Mural Festival gonna be?
It's almost always in August. No, it is always in August, and I believe they usually have it around the August long weekend. It usually sort of culminates in that August long weekend.
Like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that kind of area?
Well, it used to usually be over 2 or 3 weeks, and then a lot of the festival just indicates when the murals are being painted. So it'll be done over that period, and then they'd have a lot of events going on, particularly on the weekends, but even a lot during the week as well.
Because especially the mural, I can take my travel club down and we can do a little walking tour there too. I'll let them know. I'll see because I would love it because I was thinking because Kelowna does not have any mural festivals. I'm afraid to say. But if yeah, I love it. And what I was thinking is we go down there to to see the murals, then come back to Kelowna and make our own murals for our buildings here in Kelowna. I mean, that'd be a really cool idea. I just thought of it right now. And I really like the when you were doing like the ocean and the painting of the ocean and all that stuff. That's so, it's Flatland, and I love it how they did that. I kind of remind me. I have the audiobook of it, and I didn't know when in the movie when in the movie the Solaris come out.
There was the original movie, I think, was in the late 60s, early 70s. That was with a Polish director. It was very much more sort of sort of art house Eastern European cinema, and then the big Hollywood blockbuster one came out, I think, in the early 2000s. George Clooney, I think Sandra Bullock was the.
Okay, I'll have to look.
That was Gravity, wasn't it?
You would think Gravity, but actually
Were they in another movie together?
Oh, maybe it wasn't. I know George Clooney was in it. Hang on, 2002.
I was gonna say, who's Googling it first?
Yeah. No, not sorry. I got it mixed up with Gravity, but it is George Clooney. Natasha McElhonney, not and Ulrich Tukur.
All right, thank you so much. That was awesome. I loved it. I'd love to come to your next mural.
We're hoping, Megan, it'll be August 24th. That's the sort of the penciled date. It's not an ink yet, it's just penciled.
Okay. All right, I will let them know, and we'll see if they can come. That'd be sweet. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Megan.
All right, we've got Rita next.
Okay, I just wanted to say I was so impressed with this evening's presentation. It's just amazing. Both the descriptions of all the murals, and also, Ali, your presentation about, the background of the artists and the the style of art that Native people from different parts of the land use, and also even like the city politics that went into acquiring all these spaces for art. It was just an amazing thing that you were able to collect all this information and present it to us. So this was really great.
Thanks,
I really
Rita.
appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much. It really means a lot to I think it's really interesting, like especially the urban planning angle, right? And the the sort of urban land politics. To me, it's fascinating, but I never know. I'm like, maybe people are just thinking, like, what is he talking about?
No,
This isn't art.
this
We're
is
not talking
great.
about art anymore. So I really appreciate that resonates too.
Yeah, that's great. That's really wonderful that you were able to present all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Well, thank you so much.
Rita, you'll have to come with us on the walking tour this summer if you're available.
Yeah, August, I'll be around, I think.
Yeah.
So it won't be quite the same because you can't have this much discussion, but still it'd be interesting to do it.
All right, and now we have a hand from iPhone.
This is iPhone Pierre.
Oh, is it got Pierre? Oh, it does say Pierre at the end. But Pierre doesn't usually call in on an iPhone. All right, so it's Pierre. Come on in, Pierre. And then next we've got Carrie. iPhone
Hello.
Pierre.
Yes, sorry.
iPhone Pierre.
Yeah, I couldn't get the bag going tonight, so I'm on the iPhone. Yes. Thank you so much. It is an amazing evening. I am really like surprised of how interesting this was, and I came in just like at 10 because I was getting home. Actually, I think I will try to listen to it again. There's so much in there, but I agree with Rita that it was amazing. I might have missed some of it. Many of that, it was new to me, and I might have missed some of it. Well, cannabis is legal on this side of the country. I am from Ottawa. It's almost midnight here. But also, to help me, French is my first language. So, English is not always as easy for me to grasp, but the trigons and the ovoids, I was learning as I was going, and I appreciated the waving someone welcome, what it says about the ownership of the land, and all those concept, all those approach, the messages that they have, with the eagles and with the. I think I'll listen to it again, but thank you very much. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you, Pierre.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And to be fair, ovoid and trigon are not common words in English usage either. it's not those aren't words we come across very often.
They're great words, though. They should be used more often in everyday speech.
Well, we're trying, right?
And we've got a hand from Carrie. Both Carrie and Pierre are joining from the future. 3 hours in the future, so I'll just give Carrie
4 hours, 3 or 4 hours in the from the far east of Canada.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, we gotcha.
Had a little trouble there, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Rita and Pierre and everybody for the rich descriptions tonight. Just like a couple weeks ago with the other gallery tour, Amy, just being able to describe, to even understand the scale of this sort of artwork, specifically murals, outdoor murals. It's something that maybe sighted people walk by all the time in different cities they're in and just notice it. And this is the kind of thing that brings it to life for me. And specifically that last one, with the Polish one, I'm Polish, so I was fascinated to hear about the artist who did that one. But specifically all the inclusion of the natural world, mention of different marine thing like the waves in that last one, the orcas in a lot of them. As someone who used to have low vision, orcas were always my favorite. They were very black and white, so it was very easy for me to see them. But yeah, I think it's all beautiful. And yeah, you're right. During COVID, even this VocalEye stuff, these live events we do every Wednesday night, it's the kind of thing that this morning on CBC, they actually had a whole feature about how there's less funding now for this sort of arts and culture that this VocalEye is, and that these artists are able to share their work with the world. I think it's just amazing, and I wish we could find ways. It's one of the advantages of COVID, one of the good things that came from it, and it's just disappointing that it's sort of being lost again, because it's very it offers a lot to people, and it, like you say, art has this it forces us to reflect inward often, and I think that's important.
Yeah Thanks, Carrie, that's really insightful.
Yeah, it's very true.
And yeah, again, I'm in Ontario here, and I do some consulting, accessibility consulting for some festivals and stuff in Toronto area. But to get an idea of this walking tour for all these murals out there in Vancouver is excellent from afar. So thank you.
Thanks,
Carrie. We wish you were here on the tours with us.
Yeah, I'd love to do one sometime.
It'd be nice if we could get a grant and just bring everybody to Toronto, or bring everybody to New York, or bring everybody to Colorado, or something.
Yeah, we need to
write those grants.
Yeah, I need to do a big VocalEye meetup somewhere if we could.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Make it possible.
That'd be nice.
That would be so fun. Well, speaking of fun,
this is Sheila. May I say something?
Oh, yeah, come on in.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Sheila, and I used to live in the area of 12th and Kingsway back in the 80s.
Okay.
And knowing how you were saying about triangles, there are a couple of buildings that do have triangles on it. If you care for it, I don't know, especially coming from downtown when you're hitting Main and just a block away from Kingsway is that mill building in the middle of everything. It used to be when you're hitting Kingsway and Broadway, it was a sports outlet. That's a particular building, but when you come from downtown, that's the building that has got a little bit of triangle to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when Rita was saying about
triangles,
that's as those buildings, there are still triangles there, you know, and with the boat being the kayak being the triangle.
Yeah.
But that's a reflection on me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I used to live in the area and I always wondered how people would live in that little corner of the triangle.
Yeah. What's the point of that little corner? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like what would you put there? You know, like a triangle table or something like that's when I was just, you know, a teenager and growing up and everything, right? So
you'd have to put a lamp and a plant.
That way.
Yeah, a lamp and a plant. That's what fits there. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the area has changed so much. And I remember the time when I was there was a Salvation Army there. I don't know if any of you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the corner there, used to hang out there with all the boys and the girls from school, you know. And then, of course, going to school and coming was on that corner with the car dealership right at the corner there.
Mm-hmm.
And the St. Joseph's Hospital on the right side there when you're coming from downtown. Mm-hmm. All these memories are coming back when I'm listening to Rita. I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't believe I'm going there right now. I just want to say thank you. And another thing is, when Rita was saying, what was the year when those places was, when you were saying, I can imagine being like a lake and water there.
Up until like before the 1880s, is when Main Street was a large creek. When you got further south, like when you got up towards sort of around 16th, it was a huge ravine that dropped down into the creek, and then as it got sort of flattened out more as you got down towards Broadway, and there was sturgeon. There were there were huge. Huge fish in there, and huge, beavers and all kinds of other animals. I get all this from sort of oral histories from the elders, from the Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam folks that I've talked to.
Really, huh?
Up on the side of Burgoo, which is up there around, I want to say around like sort of 15th-ish, and
yep.
Wow.
Ronnie Dean Harris, I think, is the artist. He's from the Stalo Nation, and he did a beautiful depiction of sturgeon on the side of the restaurant, and that's a tribute to the sturgeon that used to be in the waterway that was paved over to become Main Street.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, however long ago, I can't imagine like today seeing all the streets and the cars and everything. How beautiful it would have been if it was stayed the way it is described, with sturgeons and nature and us being there. It would be so beautiful. I can just imagine.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for bringing everything to us. It was beautiful the way you said it and the way you presented it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to believe that you can pave over water.
Yeah, the creek.
You know what I mean? It just seems a little mind-blowing that that's something that can be done or that was even contemplated being done.
It was just channeled into a culvert, basically.
Yeah. Well, once again, I have been in a space where I have learned a heck of a lot. And I was there in person when we did the walking tour, although I think, a mind can only contain so much at one time, right? And so you remember certain details, and then, you know, a year later, you're like, oh, I remember some of that and not so much of that. But now we have this archived on the YouTube channel, so we can revisit this information anytime that we want to, which I think is brilliant. So I just want to thank both of you, Eileen and Ali, for sharing this knowledge. It's nice to be able to have content that is accessible to the community, that's available on demand, because oftentimes content that's made accessible becomes inaccessible after a certain period of time, right? Because there's always some kind of union contract or something that says, oh, after a certain time, you know, it's, you know, the audio description is going to disappear or whatever it is. But having this YouTube channel as a place to archive these special episodes that we do with such rich content and such rich description and such rich information is like creating a library of accessible content, accessible arts content. And I really value that. And it sounds like there are folks in our space that really value that too.
Well, thanks, Amy. And it's a bit harkening back to what the artists were trying to say about the, you know, it's knowledge that everybody should have, and that intergenerationally we need to just keep circulating it and passing it and making sure that it doesn't disappear off into the evanescence.
Totally fair. Totally fair. Ali, any plug for Vancouver DeTours that you want to do? Because you do other things than just the Mural Festival. You do other tours, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Thanks for the offer. I'm a decent historian, terrible business person, so I forget to plug. So thanks for the information. Yeah, VancouverDetours.ca is the website. I'm not sure what I'm sort of juggling a few things now. I have a full-time job with BC Housing, and I also have a pretty full-time research contract with SFU. So the tours have kind of taken the back burner now. It's more sort of a passion project than a full-time thing. But we're still out there doing stuff. There's still mural tours going every Sunday. They're just by donation with our guide Pete at the moment. He'll be doing the bulk of them. And we also do, it's not all art stuff. That's, you know, that's a more recent thing. Most of our tours deal more with, you know, sort of like social history, urban planning, cultural heritage, talking about, you know, neighborhood change and all of those things. So yeah, if you're interested, get in touch. We could always also look at doing something that wasn't art specific in the future, maybe with VocalEye, if you're looking to branch out as well.
Possibilities are endless.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is why you know so much about neighborhoods, and right, like Rita was pointing out, the city politics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to blur the lines between the different roles. To me, it's all sort of leading towards the same place. It's just different vectors, different channels to do it. So.
Well, my friends, I wish you a lovely evening. And I know, Eileen, it won't be long till we see you at the theater and hear your voice describing something, or in this space, hear your voice describing something. And Ali, I hope it's not long before we're on a live tour with you, or you're back in this space with us again. So thank you so much for sharing your gifts in this space.
Thanks for asking me, Amy. Really appreciate it. Lovely to be here this evening. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for lending your ears.
Thank you so much.
VocalEye, vocaleye.ca. Special thanks to our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the British Columbia Arts Council, the Province of British Columbia, and the City of Vancouver.